When it comes to weapons in D&D, not all of them were created equal, and many are considered to be mechanically subpar. On top of this, the rulebooks don't provide us much detail on these weapons, leaving us to fill in the gaps of how our weapons look and feel. Due to this lack of information, I'd like to go through and examine all the weapons of D&D to answer: what is this weapon, both in history and in D&D? How is it different from the other weapons available? And does it need to be made better, and how can we do so? For today's video, let's look at the scythe's younger sibling, the sickle. The sickle is a one-handed weapon with a simple handle attached to a curved blade, which was sharpened on the inside edge. Measuring only 33 to 41 centimeters long from tip to haft, the sickle was initially designed for use in harvesting crops like grain. Originally forged from flint or bone in prehistory, advances in smithing saw the blade evolve with iron and, later, steel. Excavated archaeological sites in Mesopotamia have traced the sickle to the Epipaleolithic era, which was around 18,000 to 8,000 BC. Their blades were made of curved pieces of wood or bone with flint teeth attached, measuring between 10 to 20 centimeters in length. This design indicated that they would mostly be used with a sawing motion rather than the smooth strikes of modern designs. As humanity moved into the Neolithic age, the sickle was key in transitioning us from hunter-gatherer communities to more crop-based farming communities. It's in the Bronze and Iron Ages, however, that we see the modern design of the sickle take place, where the blade is made entirely from curved metal rather than utilizing teeth. The sickle's design made it very popular in any agrarian culture, being found in the Middle East, Europe, Africa, the Americas, and East Asia. As a weapon, however, the sickle's design did not really find a ton of popularity. In ancient Egypt, the khopesh, a sickle-shaped sword developed from battle axes, was found to be in use from around 3000 BC to 1300 BC. Measuring 50 to 60 centimeters in length, the curve of the weapon was typically used to trap an enemy's sword arm or pull their shield away, but fell out of use as Egypt transitioned into the Iron Age. Further east, many Asian cultures adopted the use of sickles into weaponry. The Japanese kama or kusarigama were originally designed to cut rice, but became prominently featured in Okinawan kobudo as a farmer's tool turned weapon after the Satsuma invasion in 1609. Considered one of the hardest weapons to learn in kobudo due to the inherent dangers of practicing with the weapon, the kama's curved design made it easy to trap enemy weapons, opening up their opponent to follow up attacks. Back in Europe during the Renaissance in the 16th century, fencing master Paulus Hector Mayer compiled an encyclopedia of martial arts at the time, one chapter of which contained techniques on fighting with sickles. While never adopted by formal militaries or professional fighting forces, the sickle remained a weapon of opportunity for many cultures across the world. Due to the sickle's importance as a farming tool in various societies, it took on a lot of symbolism as well. Due to the writings from Pliny the Elder's Natural History, it's believed that the sickle played a prominent role in the Celtic Druids' ritual of oak and mistletoe. This ritual involved a druid climbing a sacred oak tree with a golden sickle, cutting down the mistletoe hanging from it, and sacrificing 2 white bulls to then make an elixir that helped with infertility and poison. The sickle also took on the role of depicting farmers, shown most prominently in the former Soviet Union's hammer and sickle, where the hammer represents the industrial working class and the sickle represents the agricultural working class. While preserved in many martial arts styles as a weapon, the sickle's role as a tool has cemented it in history for bringing humanity to its agricultural roots. In D&D, The sickle is described as a farm implement slightly modified and strengthened to make a simple, light melee weapon. Introduced in 2nd edition, the sickle was a favorite weapon of druids, as well as characters that wanted their weapons to be more inconspicuous to the local guards. In older editions, the sickle would cost between 6 silver and 6 gold pieces, weighed between 0.9 and 1.4 kilograms, and would deal either 1d4 or 1d6 slashing damage depending on the edition you were playing in. In 5th edition, the sickle costs 1 gold piece, weighs 0.9 kilograms, deals 1d4 slashing damage, and has the light weapon property. Compared to the other simple melee weapons, the sickle really doesn't have anything going for it, containing the lowest damage dice available. The light weapon property does allow the sickle to be used in 2-weapon fighting, which means that if an attack action is made with a light melee weapon held in one hand, the wielder can use their bonus action to attack with a different light melee weapon being held in the other hand. Unfortunately, that is the only weapon property given to the sickle, giving it less ways to use it when compared to the light hammer or the dagger. With all this in mind, the sickle is somehow worse than the other 1d4 simple weapons, maybe even the worst simple melee weapon of them all. It almost feels like its only reason for existing is to provide a slashing weapon that deals 1d4 damage. While dual-wielding the sickle may help in terms of its damage profile, without enough monsters having different resistances, immunities, and vulnerabilities to mundane damage types, the only real positive for the sickle is that it only costs 1 gold piece. So, as a long-term weapon option, the sickle is definitely not viable. Perhaps it was only intended to be used for improvised weapons, or maybe it was just there to check a box for the game designers. Whatever the reasoning was for including it in such a poor state, what if we wanted to have the sickle be a viable weapon option for our characters? Maybe we want to play as a peasant who uses their sickle as a reminder of their agrarian roots. Or perhaps we want to roleplay as Karl Marx, dual-wielding a hammer and sickle to seize the means of production in Faerun. If we were to use the sickle as it is now, those characters are going to be wielding a weapon that is actively hindering their usefulness in combat. So, let's look at how we can fix the sickle in D&D. My first suggestion would be to simply make the sickle a finesse weapon. The finesse weapon property allows the wielder to use their choice of either strength or dexterity for the attack and damage rolls. Given the real-life use of the sickle in martial arts, it makes logical sense to let this weapon be used by dexterity-based characters like rogues, even if monks would already be able to use them as monk weapons. Plus, having a second finesse melee weapon in the simple weapon category already increases the amount of variety players have to choose from, even if those weapons are very similar in terms of damage. My second suggestion to fix the sickle in D&D would be to add a trip attack to it. As an action, a character could use the sickle to attempt a trip attack on an enemy within range. The target must roll a dexterity saving throw, where the DC is 8 plus the character's attack bonus with the sickle. If the target fails, they are knocked prone. While this feature is present on the sickle in Pathfinder, I believe adding it to the 5th edition sickle would give this simple weapon a reliable way to inflict conditions onto enemies, which gives players the options to set enemies up for follow-up attacks and makes it harder for them to get away. As I mentioned when I suggested this in my video on the quarterstaff, this ability would conflict with the Battlemaster's trip attack maneuver. But since the maneuver retains the damage of the trip attack, whereas this proposed feature sacrifices damage to try and trip the target, this keeps the Battlemaster's trip attack rewarding for the fighter, while the sickle still gets a unique ability. My third suggestion on how to fix the sickle in D&D would be to add Pathfinder 2nd Edition's expanded critical effect that they have for knives. In Pathfinder, when a critical strike is rolled with a weapon, that weapon's group adds an additional effect onto the attack. For knives, which includes daggers and sickles, this effect deals 1d6 bleeding damage at the end of the affected creature's turns for as long as it has the condition, which typically is around 1 minute. This gives the sickle an added damage debuff that can help whittle down tougher opponents, but it only occurs on critical strikes, so sickle wielders couldn't abuse it to cheese tough fights. Now, these are just a few of my own suggestions on how to make the sickle better in D&D 5th edition. If any or all of these suggestions were implemented, I believe that the sickle would become a viable option for characters that want to have the flexibility to deal damage through bleed effects while also having maneuvers like the trip attack that makes enemies easier to hit. Essentially, it could become a more melee-focused alternative to the dagger, where instead of having the option to throw the weapon, characters would be able to utilize trip attacks to manipulate their enemies. Giving players these types of choices, even with weapons as simple as the sickle or dagger, allows them to make meaningful decisions about their character's equipment, which can add to the fun of everyone at the table. However, that's going to bring us to the end of today's video on the sickle. A peasant's tool turned improvised weapon, the sickle doesn't currently have a defined role in the weapon roster of D&D. By giving it something simple like a trip attack and adding it to the finesse weapons, we can bring the sickle more in line with the dagger to be a viable weapon option for dexterity-based classes. Regardless, what I want to know is, what do you think of the sickle? Do you like my ideas to make it an alternate dagger option? Or do you think it needs to stay where it's at as a basic improvised weapon template? You can let me know down in the comment section, or you can discuss it on the Alt-Roll Discord using the links in the description. While on the server, you can pop into our courses that teach the basics of D&D, and if you like what we do, supporting us on our Ko-fi goes a long way in helping us keep Alt-Roll going. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.